So we are preparing to go live, and my name is Karen Jed Smith. Welcome to Exceptional TV. I'm your host and creator of the Ultimate Negotiators Formula, advocacy coach, and mentor of international activists engaged at the United Nations. So we are preparing to go live. This is, and I can hear it coming in at the back, and so therefore I have to shut that down. There we go. So we know that we're live. We know we're live. So this Exceptional TV segment focuses on people who are driven to make a difference and to lead in their field. And some of these are some of our good troublemakers, like John Lewis, who may often be unsung heroes, but are out there making a difference because it matters to them. And it matters enough that when things get tough and even dire, they keep going. They may be here in America, they can be in the country of my birth country, Australia, or in Nigeria, Syria, Madeira, Japan, Bulgaria, anywhere in the world. But today I have with me somebody who is from the sunny side of America over in the California area. And what we're going to do is take time to listen to her story, to take a little bit of a look beneath the surface and dig into the undercurrents that she deals with as she's been dealing with the topic of business, politics, and psychometrics. So I want to welcome Natasha Todorovic. Welcome.
Karen, it is awesome to be with you. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for the magic that you are making with your program and your work in the world. It is amazing work.
Yeah, well, we all contribute a little piece. Now, I know that it already seems like a year ago, only it was just a week ago when the elections were all happening. You know, things move on so quickly these days. And it really is just a week when you were right in the thick of things. Now, where were you? What were you doing? Now, I can give the folks a hint that you're from Santa Barbara in California. I got the sunny scene already set there, but tell us a little bit about what you were in the midst of and how you got to be there.
Okay, so, look, let's start with the politics piece, right? And I think a lot of people go, oh, politics, and they roll their eyes and they just want out because they think of manipulation, they think of game playing, they think of, just kind of nasty, toxic relationships. And politics truly is this, and not a game, but it's the activity of moving resources around. So it's the answer to the question of how should who get which resources given to whom, where and why, right?
Where and why.
When, where, and why. And I mean, that's what people, whether they are cities like ours in Santa Barbara or nations like, I don't know, Nigeria, or, continents, there are resources that are being moved around in some way, shape, or form. And one group believes it should be used in one way, and another group believes it should be used in another way. And there's that tussle. And that's kind of what elections are about. And so I'm not a political specialist by no means, but about, I think it was 8 weeks ago, I was hired by one of our mayoral candidates. And the goal was really to figure out what were people thinking in our fair city. Did they like this candidate? Did they see this candidate as a leader? Were they going to vote for this particular candidate? And I'd done some polling before, and it's not really polling in the traditional sense. I work with these assessments and psychometrics, and what we do is we look at human nature, like the human below the surface. And
well, that's what, if I may jump in, Natasha, you said you were involved in the polling. Now, the average person, you're teasing out this difference in terms of how you approach the polling. And that's the piece that we're really, I'm excited to look at in this as we put together politics, business, and psychometrics. Psychometrics aren't always what people think of when they think of polling. So yeah, I'm glad that you're jumping into looking at what a little bit of, and that's where it's what you've been involved in for a number of years. Tell us about the psychometrics, and then we'll circle back around right back into the midst of the polling and what is going on. And thank you for that intro to politics as a movement of resources.
Yeah, so the assessment part of our business really relates to understanding what's going on beneath the surface for leaders, for teams, for organizations, for culture. And they're the pieces of human connectedness that change easily, right? So I might have a taste or an opinion, and then my preference or my taste or my opinion changes as I get to know somebody, or as I have different experiences, or as I get more information, right? So that's the stuff that you can measure one day, and then the next day it's going to be all different. Right.
The weather.
And it's like the human weather. Right. And then there's stuff that goes on beneath the surface. It's really hidden, often to us, often to others, but it really animates the way we choose, the way we behave, the way we attach or disattach to particular people and leaders. And that's the stuff that we look at. And the big word for it is, psychosocial, developmental, yada, yada. There's a bigger phrase for it, but I won't use it. And that's the stuff that does change, but over the long span of time, right?
So that's a little bit more like the deeper currents that are at play in our lives, rather than the waves that are blown by the surface whims and whatever you might describe it.
Absolutely. And I love that you use that metaphor, because I use the metaphor of the iceberg like every good consultant does. And the 7/8 of the iceberg are under the water line. That's what sank the Titanic. And the top, 1/8 is what you can see. And usually people work with what they can see, but all this other stuff is going on under the surface. So I love that you use that. Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. But because that's, just in my own little world, which has been part of it is I've spent some time around the UN, and boy, talk about a lot of stuff going on beneath the surface of all of the supposed discussions and formulation of even global policy elements. But sometimes it looks more like, depends how the person woke up that morning, whether they, what happened, and how they bring it into global politics with them, and separating out what is deep and certain and persistent, and that which is really going to pass like the waves. That's often a challenge. So what were you doing with your, how did you get to be called in to do this polling for your mayor in Santa Barbara? Or candidate, I should say.
So I've always had this thing that I wanted to play in politics some, because that leader and who chooses to follow that leader, right? So I don't believe that leadership is positional, even though it is, right? You can have the position as a leader. Yeah. But what really happens is there's a relationship between the person called leader and the people called followers. And the followers choose this person. Whether consciously or unconsciously, that person is chosen.
Right.
So they are chosen because of a number of factors: how they are relating, who they are in relationship, how people feel about them. So a number of years ago, I was really concerned about a particular election in our city. And it wasn't mayoral, it was a council member. And it was so important to me that I gathered a group of folks together. I designed a quote poll,
Right.
and we called people to find out what they thought of the candidates. It was a pool of, I think, 5 or 6 candidates. We asked them a set of questions that I designed to try to get sort of deeper into how they were reacting to these candidates. And by the end of, I think it took us about 3-4 weeks. By the end of that, we were 3 weeks out from the election, and I had a set of numbers. And turns out that set of numbers very accurately predicted exactly who was going to be voting for whom and in what percentages. And then by the time the election rolled around and people actually cast their ballots, I was off, here and there by, maybe 3%, 2%, 5% ish, right? Which doesn't matter when it's, as different as these numbers were. It matters when it's super close. But it was close enough to the percentages that each candidate got that, I kind of was excited that I'd nailed it, right? So this particular candidate had, I'd been involved in local politics, meaning, more of the citizen trying to improve things, pushing back against the sort of, I see nothing, I hear nothing kind of government that, just engages in its process. Right. So she'd seen me and she'd seen how I speak and come across. And we were working on an alcohol ordinance for the city. And we'd gotten, we'd been on opposing sides, right? And I'm not sure I really liked her. I'm not sure she really liked me. But as we came together to talk about what needed to happen with this alcohol ordinance and how the state was controlling our local vibe and culture and consequences to us, we realized that we saw this in a way that was complementary. We started to talk. We, I think, began to change our minds about one another. And we started talking about what we saw as the problems were in the city. And at some point I said, you know what, I don't know if this is going to be useful for you, but this is a poll that I did. This is how we did it. And, she took the information, she thought about it, then came back and, I thought she was, we're just going to have a conversation. Next thing I knew, she was like, I want you to do this. And it was, it was about 6 weeks out from the election. Normally that kind of thing takes a lot longer.
Yes.
Takes a
6 weeks not at all.
Yeah. So we just kind of put everything aside, did the major client work we were working on, but it was literally from 6 a.m. to midnight every day, scrambling to put this poll together. And we didn't have time to do the phone calls. It was just going to take too much time. So we, I designed it, the core things where you can get an indicator of how people are going to vote is they tell you who they're going to vote for, right? They don't always do that, right? They kind of get there and they go, I read something in the paper and I'm angry and I'm going to change my mind, right? You don't know what they're going to do. But you can more easily predict some of the behavior when you know who they like, right? So ran
So
through.
you were getting them to share with you through the poll who they like as distinct from who they were going to vote for.
Yes. And
Sort of?
well, and so what I designed was not a poll per se. What I designed was kind of this interesting amalgam of let's have fun with this, right? Because nobody wants to sit there and go, okay, I'm going to do a poll, right? So,
Right.
so
How can I get this done?
it's like, really? And when I talk to somebody, when I go through the questions with people, it would take 20 to 40 minutes with a single person. I got it down to about 5 to 7 if you went through it quickly. But they got a report on their sort of Santa Barbara type. Right. And so they were either a, mountain lion, and here are the characteristics of a mountain lion. So I was taking the work that I knew about personality and type and turn that into kind of a fun quiz where they got a result that said something about who they were.
Yeah, because it's one of the things, one of the last things we do when we leave the house. One of the, is check ourselves in the mirror. We like to see ourselves. We like to see a reflection of us. And we like to find out what kind of personality. Have I moved? Have I changed? People love to find out about themselves. I mean, we think we should know about ourselves, but we need that feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see different parts of ourselves through different models and lenses. And look, this was not a validated personality assessment at all, right? It's just a fun quiz. But
I'd never quite imagined myself as really, really, a mountain lion. So it's okay,
Right. There was the dolphin, there was the sea lion, there, right? I kind of picked animals around Santa Barbara that kind of had a different, you'd think of them as a different personality, right? So that's what we did to make it fun. And it also gave people a little bit more engagement in some of the issues, because not everybody's really well versed in the issues, particularly if you're not, you're working, you're not fighting them, you're expecting somebody else to do it. So it gave them a little bit of that. Then there were the polling pieces, which, you do in a standard poll. And then there was the beneath the surface stuff, which really worked at getting to who do you see as a leader? And do you like this person? And do you believe that they're competent? And, what are your biggest, what are your biggest challenges living in Santa Barbara? And, what should a leader be like?
Yeah. So you were really looking at, so this was all, there were different phases of the poll, the whatever. What did you call it? Did you really call it a poll? Or
so when I spoke to the candidate, I called it the poll. When I spoke to other people, I said, we have a great quiz.
Okay, there you go. Even right there, you speak differently to different people as to what means to them. Yeah. And how to get their engagement. As you were speaking, now this is probably a little bit oblique to what you were doing, but it occurred to me that this kind of approach, this kind of a quiz for people, could actually get people a little bit more engaged in the political process by helping expand their concept of what they're actually engaging in, because people have got, we've all got our own probably, middle school concepts of politics.
Yes.
And maybe they get a little bit upgraded, to high school level or, first year university or whatever. But, still, by and large, we don't always expand our and appreciate perhaps how important politics is to our lives. It's part of the environment within which we live, and we often don't pay attention to it until we bump into it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
by then it's
Yeah.
often too late.
Then you're absolutely right. It's too late. And the trainer, educator in me absolutely was thinking exactly that. Like, let me make this a little bit of an educational process. So when people come out the other side, they understand the different issues that are at stake.
Right.
A little bit, that there's at least an increase in the awareness of the things that are happening in their own city. And what I found, which was really surprising to me, is that the majority of voters, I'd say, and I don't remember my stats, so I'm going to say majority, meaning more than 50%, probably 70, 80%, didn't watch a debate, didn't really read a paper, didn't really do a whole lot of research on the candidate that they decided to vote for. And when that happens, we get the candidates we deserve.
Right. I was actually just last night was just listening to a little bit. Elon Musk was talking about some stuff to do with legislation. And he, of course, he's looking at the thing from the point of view of how America is deciding to deal with space issues. But the thing that caught my attention was that he said, our legislation, our laws, our regulations, they're immortal. Yeah. It's really hard. You can change them, but once they're in place, they tend to stay.
They tend to
get more complex, more interwoven, and they're hard to undo. So your point about educating people about politics and the implications that we're often unaware of. It's a critical issue.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's why citizens and groups that get together around an issue have to work so hard for so long to turn it around, because it's like a train on the train tracks going in its direction. And, that's the same thing that organizational leaders face. And what they also face is, once they have these systems and these processes and approaches in place, leaders often don't feel like they are leading. They're trying to keep the pieces together while this, Titanic of a culture, Titanic of a ship goes in its direction. And most of the time, they've been constructed fairly well. But when you need to change it, you've really got to change direction, change processes, change strategy. There's a stat, I think it's something like 93% of leaders are planning on change, right? And those who have to implement it, of those who need to implement it, only 10% feel they can and they're prepared. And the gap there is just because, just because you've got an objective, you want to get there, right? Seeing the vision is one thing. Getting everybody behind it, getting people to understand it, getting people to understand how they're going to work together in a world where it now takes multiple people to get a project going, where it's not easy always to collaborate with people who see the world differently. That's the trick to get from I've got a great idea to wow, we did it. Right. And I mean, that's what people call, that's what people call politics in the middle of the I've got a great idea to the goal. because
Right.
somebody wants something that somebody else doesn't want, or they understand it differently, or their values are different. So
Right.
what they call politics is really the process of negotiating relationships in a way that people can come together in functional ways to get to the objective.
And I guess that sounds to me like, when I think about my experiences in life, and one of them was I spent some time on boats back in one of my lifetimes. But one of the interesting things that people often don't think about is on the water compared to in a car. Most of us have experiences with the car. You're driving down the road, you've got your accelerator, you've got your brake, you've got your steering wheel. It's all
And
very
one person is,
responsive.
yeah, and one person is usually driving.
And it's responsive.
Yes.
On a boat, even if you want to put on the brakes, there are no brakes.
There are no brakes.
There is resistance to the boat, which will naturally slow it down if you turn the engine up, but you can't stop on a dime.
Right.
You usually have to rely on other people to help you, because a boat, especially the bigger the boat, and you're talking about corporations and things like those, boats are big. And so you don't just have the one person in the car driving it. It's just not that simple. But that's why I guess my experience has been like, as working in the realms that I have at the UN, you're trying to turn this massive ship, and it's just not that simple. And so you have to anticipate differently. You have to prepare differently. So yeah, it's even just putting on the brakes is just not a thing.
Yeah, you have to prepare. Yeah, you have to prepare the people. One of the, so we train and certify consultants, and one of the consultants I was supporting through a project, he was doing some work at Siemens, and the senior executive team was super excited. They had their change plan. They knew what they were going to do. They were going to roll it out, blah, blah, blah. And we had done the assessment. We've got this little change readiness index. It tells you how change ready people are, how resilient they are, who's going to put on the brakes, right?
Right.
And when you're going and somebody's putting on the brakes and you're going in different directions, that kind of throws a wrench in the works, right? And, we've been able to assess not only that senior leadership team, but the people who are going to be impacted by the change. And so we worked out some slides and some data that he could go back to them with. And when he presented it, they sat back, startled, had to absorb the idea that their great idea that they were excited about the day before was going to crash and burn. And they had to think differently about the process and about the people, because they had this data that was accurate to what was going on in their organization, but that they never really quite acknowledged or seen. And to get from here to there, as you're saying, we need to be able to mesh the teams in a way that people understand. They're buying in, they know how to work together, they know how they're going to contribute, and that they've got that process to go through the kind of bumpy period to get to that new way of working together. And that's the part that's most difficult. It's not the visioning and the strategy.
Right.
It's not the goal and articulating it. It's that messy middle.
Right. The muddy mess in the middle. because it is. So so you were consulting, for your politician in this case, and you've learned a lot of these realities. I would imagine that even with Siemens, you were you are, on one hand, you're dealing with the vision of the upper level management and where they're wanting to take things. Then you've got the realities of the siloing that takes place, the different little fiefdoms that probably happen, because I've seen a lot of this in other places as well.
Yeah.
And then, then it really gets into resource management amongst all of it. And then it begins this whole process of renegotiating amongst all of the people and stuff like that. So even I would imagine that the coming, you were able to uncover information that probably most people don't even have to look at, that can be at best sobering, probably.
Yeah.
But then helping people to deal with that seems to be probably where the rub lies.
Yes. The having the information and then having it absorbed are two different things. You're absolutely right, Karen.
Yeah, and so then you had the situation just recently with you in your media, in your election situation, where you gathered the information, you provided that insight back to your political aspirant. And then you also made that available to other people, I believe, right? And even the media. I had understood.
Yes.
Tell us about that little piece. I don't quite understand what the dynamics there, but
okay. Oh, you will love this because you're such an expert in negotiation. So back in the summer, in August, before anyone ever knew there was an election, before anyone was aware of who the candidates were, before any, quote, normal person was paying attention, right? A small group in the business area did a focus group, right? And it was like 30 people. And, they talked about, what the election was going to mean to that sort of downtown business group. And they came up with some results. And as you know, if you are the first one to kind of put a stake in the ground that sets an expectation or a tone or frames something, then people work around that framing. And what they did for the media was they set that expectation. And they said, this is how the candidates are going to break down. So when, and they'd just been from, I think it was August, September, just been citing that over and over and over and over. And when I was having a discussion with our candidate and we were in it, it takes a little bit of time to look at the data, to put it together in a way that other people will be able to understand, to make meaning of it, so it takes a little bit of time to do that. And we were going through it and discussing the implications, discussing messaging, discussing how does this shift what you're going to say in the debates and what you say to the media. And then we were having the conversation of, do you want to release this? Do you think that this is going to be useful? And some things were starting to come out. And we were looking at it going, wow, that is so off base. And we just got to the point where, we said, let's release this. So she brought up a particular person in the media, writer, journalist, who was well respected. And she was willing to give him an exclusive on it. And he kind of ignored it and then went ahead and continued to produce what was originally installed in his brain. Right. And it was like, okay, that's interesting. That's weird. Let's try another outlet. And then she was going to give them the exclusive. And it was basically, yeah, no, we got what we want. No, thanks. Let's not let reality interfere with the story we've been telling. Then she went, and it's like, okay, let's work. Let's work with someone else. Same thing. It was like nobody wanted to listen to the data or a story that contradicted what they'd ingrained over months.
So in their own way, people were already on their path, even though it was not very long. Even they, who would not probably want to consider themselves as stuck in their ways or supporting the status quo, be it good, helpful, or any other version of it.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing.
Yeah. And we do tell ourselves stories about the world, about other people, about ourselves. And it's the rare few who question those stories.
One of the things that I know that I've looked at or pondered, especially in the last few years, even before COVID, and COVID agitated and created this underlying almost levels of anxiety that are just kind of standard norm for the day, that didn't used to be when things took more time to change. The news wasn't felt 24/7, seen, heard, available 24/7. We had time to get bored. I mean,
I think I remember those days now that you mention it.
Dig back a little bit, a few years.
There was a time like that.
There was a time like that. But so many people do not experience life like that anymore. And this, right. I think it seems to me there's this heightened level of just ongoing turbulence.
Yeah.
That people then almost become needing to hang on to whatever little bit of a flotsam and jetsam that they can find.
Yeah, just give me the one thing that I can hold on to, that I can hold on to.
And not many people or fewer people can really move and keep that agility and flexibility that is really needed, and at the same time kind of keep centered, or at least not in these heightened degrees of just, I mean, I even noticed my shoulders, the tension, things like that. I mean, they're just everyday stuff. But I think those things impact us in ongoing ways, and it bubbles up into our rationality, or sometimes lack of, whatever it might be. It does impact and affect what we and our decision-making process, which was what you're talking about here about even people in the media whose job it is to uncover the truth wherever it may lead, or at least that's my concept of what media is meant to do. But anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And
because media, they're people too. Yeah.
They are people too. Absolutely. And we are in a world of information overwhelm that is nearly impossible to sort. And information is not truth. And trying to figure out, whose agenda is pushing this particular bit of information, and the time really to be able to dig the way people used to. I think this really did change my opinion of media, because they don't have the time to dig, and they don't
No,
have the
yeah,
time to do the detective work, and the pressure to have an opinion out there and to say something that people will read consistently, whether or not
because
it's
otherwise
worth
they're
putting out there.
right. Because also then they don't want to be seen as changing their minds every few seconds. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many factors in all of these things that are quite complex.
Yeah.
I still remember going to it was an international UNITA, the UN Institute of Training and Research, et cetera, was doing some training. Gosh, it was back at around 2004, I think this was. And this is just as the internet is really beginning to ramp up. I know 98, websites were getting going, information was just really getting on, we didn't have smartphones. We did not have smartphones in our pockets at that time. That just didn't exist. We can barely remember those days, but they did exist. And just simple point, but a key thing was even then they could see, those who were thinking forward could see that what was going to become critical with this Moore's law and the growing amount of information that's out there that now everybody's got access to, is YouTube and TikTok and this, that, and the other thing, is that influencers or curators of information are going to become more and more important. So who do we listen to, and who takes the time to curate and assess and become, in a way responsible, but also aware? I think, aware of context and circumstances. And so I think that's, you were bumping there up into, who are those curating even the media? Who do we listen to? And this is becoming increasingly important as we see it playing out now. Fox News and CNN and all, who's listening to who? What echo chamber are we in?
Yes.
And then we wonder why we don't understand the person next to us, because we're all in our little bubbles.
And there are those who go from bubble to bubble to try, and their attempt is to try and get a full picture, and still that full picture isn't emerging.
It's not right. And yet, and we probably never, I think the nature of truth in that sense is we'll probably never get an ultimate truth,
Well, I mean, it's like that proverbial elephant, right? Somebody's touching the tail and they're going, no, this is a rope. And somebody's touching the leg going, no, this is a tree trunk. And and somebody's touching the trunk going, it's a right. I mean, that's where we're at. And with the work that we do, we're trying to encourage people to think in human systems terms, and the interconnection of these disparate sorts of, quote, pieces that really lead to a larger view of the whole. And that takes time, it takes energy, it takes good information, not just random information, and having the ability to separate fact from fiction, story from speculation. We have to get to a place where we are, where it isn't as, you're right, curation, where it's not as much of a mess as it is today.
And it seems, I think, that one of the key things, because we're not, nobody's going to read everything on the internet. Nobody's going to assess it all. No one person is going to do. I mean, it's just, not even a
impossible
whole institution of people is going to do that. But at least to cultivate the awareness of the need for kind of that, to be able to step back and ponder.
Yeah.
And, just that little piece, I think, gives each person the capacity, instead of being totally immersed in any one piece of information, to have that capacity to step back and then to think critically. That's, we've got this executive brain, which is amazing, which supposedly differentiates us a lot of the time from, from some of the great and terrible of animal kingdom or whatever. I'm not sure that we're better half the time, but anyway, but the point is that capacity to step back and to observe, and to allow our, other pieces of our experience, and those including tapping into those the undercurrents, the pieces that we do have access to that anyway, that's just somehow what I'm thinking, is that, because I don't want to let people think like this is all hopeless. It's such a big problem that it's hopeless, because it's not. But what can we do? What are the things that we can do that do make the difference, that allow us to navigate the way through these very vast, complex environments?
So, I mean, obviously I've got my bias about what we do. And I think if you don't tap into the human element, whether it's a productivity problem, a profit problem, a process problem, a progress problem, it is always a people problem. And if you don't understand the people involved, then it is going to be really difficult. Which is why that's my predilection. It's my predisposition to help organizations with that people side of things. And most often, not always, but most often, when you get that working, then the other stuff comes a lot more easily.
Right. You've then got a foundation when you connected to that human element. Then you've got a way to kind of figure out what is pertinent information for that person or that situation or that circumstance. Is that, focus on the human element is critical.
Yeah. If you have a group that's supposed to get a project done and they don't trust their leader and they're holding back, and the leader, let's just say this is a person with the potential to be a really great leader. They're just not connecting with their team, for example, you're going to have friction without understanding that, because nobody's going to come out and say, dude, I don't trust you. Right.
Oh, really?
Or nobody's going to come out and say, I just don't like that guy. They might say it to one another. Right. Or they'll say, did you see what, he, did you see what he or she did to, Jack right. We have that, but nobody comes out and really says, you need to do this if you want to connect more effectively. So
this is the third party. You become, in that sense, you can bring that to, is that what you're saying? You bring that to the organization? That's how you...
Yeah. That's one of the things that we do. We try to show to the leader what their approach is and whether or not it's congruent with those that they need to work with, and whether or not they're being seen as a leader. I worked with the senior management team and their assessments. Let's just say, these were the results on the assessments, right? These 5 fingers, right? And then their management team below them assess them, and they had the exact same 5 fingers, right? So when we put them together, it was a mirror image of one another. And as I was working with them, the management team decided, I don't know how it happened, but they decided, maybe it happened before, that they were going to overthrow their leadership team. They decided they needed to be the leaders because, heck, we could do it a lot better than them. Right. Those are the psychosocial dynamics, because they did not see their leaders, their positional leaders, as actual leaders that they wanted to support. So the friction and the drag in that push pull of who is going to lead, who is going to make the calls, who's going to support whom, right? That's what people call politics. But that's the normal push and pull of humans trying to get their needs met, trying to work towards objectives, maybe not in the best way, maybe not in the most elegant way.
Right. And so what you help people do is figure out given that where people are, how to get to a place where that same group of people can actually make progress happen.
Yeah, we call it congruent leadership, right? So it's not being the same, right? All those 5 fingers exactly the same. That's not leadership. They need to be like that half to quarter step ahead to be that pace car. So people accept the person as a leader. And once they accept them as a leader and they throw their, not just they're there and, they got the position, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do my job, right? That's where most of the world is. And that's why our engagement figures are so low, right? Where they come in and they say, I'm behind this project. I'm excited about it. I'm putting 100% in, and I get this person and I can contribute.
Right.
And so leadership is not a choice on the part of the leader. Leadership is a human relationship system that the leader is a part of, and they need awareness, not only of how they show up, but who their people are.
Thank you for that. So you have worked, I know, and we're already, we're already 50 minutes in, and time has flown. But Spiral Dynamics, that's the organization that you lead. Tell us a little bit about Spiral Dynamics. What is that?
Well, the Spiral Dynamics brand encompasses a few things. One is our Spiral Dynamics suite of assessments that's been validated, that's been proven. It's got, they've got 70 years of research behind the way we look at human nature, spiral, and change dynamics. So we've got the assessment suite. We have Spiral Dynamics programs and trainings and workshops for organizations and leaders and coaches and consultants looking to understand that human side of things. And then, of course, I use those processes in our assessments and this body of work in my consulting practice. So it's those 3 areas of assessment, of training and development, and also of consulting that I work in.
Wow. So you mentioned 70 years of study. You don't look of research. Don't look.
I'm actually a vampire, Karen. I've lived over 500. No. No, the researcher who began this in the mid-50s was a psychologist by the name of Claire Graves. And he was looking, during the war years and the arguments psychologists were having about maturity, because what they said was, if we can create a mature human, then that mature human will contribute to mature society. And if we have mature society, mature cities, mature people, then we will have peace on the planet, right? This is what they were grappling with.
Right, because that was right around the 50s. Yeah, 50s, 45, 50, because go into I know in the past we've talked about UN, the history of the UN, 1945, the 50s, the Korean War was still taking place. There was not yet peace on earth. You were having these growing tensions at that time, moving on into the Cold War. I mean, talk about an environment where peace was a massive and huge issue, which today it still is a big issue.
Yeah.
We watched what happened the last couple of months with Afghanistan. I know people in Syria, in Lebanon. I mean, it goes on and on and on, where we are and what we're doing, and yet what we could be doing. It's just.
Yeah. Well, and so this was the inspiration for his research. Because his students came to him. He was teaching all these different psychological approaches. He was teaching Maslow. He was teaching Skinner.
Yeah.
He was teaching Freud. He was teaching, Rogers. And his students came up to him and said, Dr. Graves, you've taught us all these guys. Which one is right? And
can you please curate this stuff for me? Oh.
Can you curate this for me? Exactly. And he sat back and he scratched his head and he didn't have an answer. And he had this dark night of the soul because he believed if he couldn't answer that question, he had no business teaching or working in psychology. So he set out to research the nature of human nature and maturity.
Right.
And
in
what
particular, focus on that. Yeah.
Because those were the discussions. And when he came sort of to the end, not the end, I mean, because, the book that we edited, his book, is called The Never Ending Quest, because it is. Right.
Right.
But when he kind of got to the end where he had all the data and he was looking at it and, he'd sort of figured out what it meant. And that took him almost 25, almost 30 years. And he met my husband, who worked with him for the last decade of his life. This framework of how we behave, how we think, how we're motivated, how we learn, who we are as leaders, how leadership changes, how teaching approaches change, how people are magnetized to one leader and repelled by another, magnetized to one teacher, repelled by another. This framework and approach in the research answered those big questions. And my husband was so impressed by it that he left the university that he was working at. He set up an organization. He and the group he was working with developed these assessments. They'd been tested and worked across, North America, Latin America, Europe, Africa. And what we saw was that human nature, even though it's expressed, human nature is human nature, even though it's expressed differently culturally, wherever we come from, these patterns are consistent.
Right. Well, that's quite a story, and we're just about at our time now. Thank you for taking the time, Natasha, to share this with me and
Thank
with
you for
all
inviting
of us.
me, Karen.
Yeah, and so I know that one thing that you do have for people, you've got a link. Oh, I've got somebody outside.
You're making connections, all kinds of connections.
So right below this video when we get to the replay, but also I just dropped in the chat for anybody's there a link. Tell us a little bit about that link, and as we close out our time together. It's something that you provided, because I like to ask those that I speak with, to give something, to leave something with our audience. So tell us a little bit about that link.
So I know that you attract a very diverse set of people. So this is a link that gets you to our advanced resources. If you're interested in terrorism, for example, we've got an article on terrorism. If you're interested in leadership, we've shared an article on leadership. We've done a comparison of our psychologist Claire Graves with Maslow, if you're more of a theoretical sort of a mind. So there are a number of different resources designed for the different kinds of people that you are probably interacting with. If you're interested in engagement, we've got an engagement article. So just pick something that resonates with you, and hopefully will give you some new and different insights using this under the surface approach that's a biopsychosocial developmental one.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, because this is, I mean, as we move into a digital era where we want our shiny tools to solve everything for us, to be reminded that we really do, at heart, we're human beings and we want connection and we are enlivened by one another. This is such an important realm of consideration, and especially for leaders and leadership. So thank you so much for taking the time and for providing this for our viewers. And I really look forward to seeing you and talking with you again sometime about next time you move on in and become what? Are you going to become not a pollster? You'll change it from polling to what's a better word for
it was a fun project. I'd like to do more of it. And I, look, Karen, this has been a delight. This has been a treat. This has been a pleasure. I love the organizational work. I love the larger social work as well. And if we do not see ourselves in terms of human relationship systems, then we are doomed to seeing the world in a fragmented way. And we're going to be hit by sudden surprises that we never expected because we see it in fragmented ways.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I really encourage people to click on that link and get some resources for their use, and come back and see us on our next exceptional TV show, same time, same place next week. And again, thank you so much for joining us, Natasha.